this is a classic example of the legislature taking something good and making it bad. 4 years ago, Mr. Speaker, in a bipartisan effort with Assemblyman Cohen, Assemblyman Wisniewski, and myself, we had sponsored a bill which has been known as On Safe Driving, 39497.2, which really was an effort to fill a gap in municipal courts around the state of New Jersey. And the purpose of that bill, Mr. Speaker, was to allow motorists to plea down from a motor vehicle violation such as a 2-point speeding ticket or a stop sign ticket or a red light ticket, a minor motor vehicle infraction. They were allowed to plead to what they call on-safe driving. No points would be assessed to their motor vehicle record. They would pay a fine. It would help expedite the dockets in municipal court, and it was really in the discretion of the prosecutor, the police officer, and the judge. And obviously it worked quite well. Mr. Speaker, last year alone, over 223,000 people in the state of New Jersey pled to on-safe driving. The program has been a huge success. Now the governor realizes this is probably another opportunity to tax something that's been good. He's ill-advised, Mr. Speaker. This not only will have an opposite effect, under the proposed legislation, on a first offense, if someone was to come to municipal court next week or after July 1st and plead to on-safe driving, they wouldn't receive any points, but they would pay $780. Now this is going to hurt the people who can afford it the least. The lower income individuals, the young drivers, our sons and daughters, the senior citizens, our parents and grandparents who might have a minor driving infraction. They go in to talk to the prosecutor about pleading to unsafe driving. Sure, they'll be allowed to after $780. A second offense, which is allowed under the statute, they will not receive the points, but they'll pay $1,300. Now, obviously nobody wants points, but if you go into municipal court, you're a 17-year-old and you've had a couple minor infractions and you plead to your second unsafe driving and they tell you it's going to cost you $1,300, I suspect that they're not going to take advantage of the unsafe driving. The third offense would cost somebody $1,650. Mr. Speaker, what are we doing? We're hurting the people who have the least amount of money to pay for these. This was supposed to be a good program. It was supposed to help fill a gap in municipal courts around the state of New Jersey. And obviously from the statistics, it's worked very well. But here's another good program that the legislature is on doing by passing this legislation. I would urge my colleagues to say no. There are other areas of revenue to be had in the state. Obviously, we're taxing, we've discussed for the last couple hours, we're taxing practically everything that moves or doesn't move. We should find legitimate areas. This is going to put a stop to something that's worked very successfully over the past 4 years. And I think, one, it's going to backfire because people aren't going to pay that kind of money. And so the governor's not going to be able to raise the money to back the deficit bonds. So what's going to happen is people are going to be pleading to other infractions, or we're going to have to find another statute to amend these violations too. So he's not going to get the revenue. Let's stop it right now, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to vote against this.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Bramnick.
Mr. Speaker, what happened to the sensitivity and heart of the Democratic Party? I thought that the Democrats were the ones who said, let's give people a second chance. First, we now take the license from people if they haven't paid their taxes without a hearing, and now the first offender in municipal court who speeds, who does a 40 and a 25 for the first time, doesn't get a second chance. I don't know what's happened, but I think that it's time to look at these issues carefully despite the financial problems in the state of New Jersey. Where's the heart?
Thank you, Assemblyman. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. All recorded or wish to be recorded? Properly recorded? Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3114 has received 44 votes in the affirmative, 33 votes in the negative, and no abstentions.
Assembly Bill 3114, having received 44 votes in the affirmative, 33 votes in the negative, and no abstention, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course of past bills. Who's this? This is Neil? Bill on the clerk's desk.
Concurring with Senate amendments, Assembly Bill number 2073, sponsored by Assemblyman Cohen, Assemblywoman Poe, Assemblywoman Watson-Coleman, Assemblyman Stanley, and Conaway, establishes the New Jersey Civil Rights Act.
Assemblyman Cohen.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to our rules, I move to concur with the Senate amendments by amendment.
Assemblyman Cohen moves to concur with the Senate amendments to Assembly Bill 2073 by amendment. Okay. Yes, Assemblyman.
If I may inquire of the sponsor of the bill, the authority for moving to concur by amendments when the amendments do not relate to the amendments made by the other house.
Assemblyman.
We are.
Well, if I may, according Rule 15:21, that when the Assembly decides to concur by amendment, and I quote, the bill or joint resolution itself shall not be amended. Pursuant to Mason's manual relating to Rule 1521C, when one house is considering the question of concurrence in the amendments of the other house, amendments to the amendments of the other house only are in order. Amendments to portions of the bill already agreed to by both houses are not proper. I would submit, Mr. Speaker, that since the amendments herein proposed do not relate to those made by the Senate, that it is improper to concur by amendment.
Assemblyman Cohen.
I disagree.
Okay.
He's qualified to wear a black robe, Mr. Speaker. What can I say?
I agree with Assemblyman Cohen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I may, very quickly then, the simple fact of the matter is rules are made to be obeyed, not made to be broken. Rule 15:21 is clear on the subject.
Assemblyman Cohen.
So that there's not any confusion, I move to waive the rule.
Yes, second? Yes. Okay, all those in favor to waive the rule, signify by saying aye. All opposed say nay.
That's
The
a
ayes.
machine vote, Mr. Chair.
Machine vote. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. Madam Clerk, close the machine.
Mr. Speaker, the motion has 46 votes in the affirmative, 32 votes in the negative, and no abstentions.
Okay, motion carries. Assemblyman Cohen. Okay, Assemblyman Cohen moves to concur with...
I've already moved for the concurrence, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
We waived the rule, so therefore, I move to concurrence.
Okay. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. Are all recorded or wish to be recorded? Madam Clerk, please close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 2073 has received 47 votes in the affirmative, 24 votes in the negative, and 7 abstentions.
Assembly Bill 2073, having received 47 votes in the affirmative, 24 votes in the negative, and 7 abstentions, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course of past bills.
Ask for an opinion from the parliamentarian. Pursuant to the provision of Rule 23:2, no rule or order of the General Assembly shall be rescinded or changed except by the affirmative vote of at least 41 members. If a member objects to the motion to rescind or change a rule or order when made, the motion shall lie over until the next meeting of the General Assembly. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, I submit that pursuant to the rules, this body cannot waive its own rules on a motion such as that for at least one session.
Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman Carroll is absolutely right, except for one fact. It says that Camp made when objected. We've already voted. So he has already waived his objection by allowing us to proceed to vote. But he's absolutely right.
Mr. Speaker,
It's true. We voted already.
He's right.
You should have wrote that before we voted. We opened the machine and closed it. Assemblyman, I have to rule. You should have raised that issue before. Thank you. Bill? Bill? Next. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3112, sponsored by Assemblyman Caraballo, imposes a fee on mobile telecommunications and telephone exchange customers for funding certain costs of the 911 system and emergency response.
Assemblyman Caraballo.
Mr. Speaker, I move the bill.
Assemblyman Caraballo moves the bill. Seeing no one further, Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. All recorded who wish to be recorded. Properly recorded. Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3112 has received 43 votes in the affirmative, 34 votes in the negative, and 1 abstention.
Assembly Bill 3112. Having received 43 votes in the affirmative, 34 votes in the negative, and 1 abstention, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course of first bills. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3115, sponsored by Assemblyman Cryan, imposes general purpose fee on certain realty transfers fees and fee on purchase of residential property for over $1 million, generally clarifies realty transfer fee law.
Assemblyman Cryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the bill.
Assemblyman Cryan moves the bill. Assemblyman Corradinus.
Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't seen the full text of the budget yet. I'm sure we'll see it in a few hours. But I hope there's adequate money appropriated for road signs around the state of New Jersey, one way pointing out at all interstate roads, tunnels, and bridges out of the state of New Jersey. Perhaps there's even some money for young people need not enter in the state of New Jersey. For the second time in 2 years, Mr. Speaker, the realty transfer fee is increasing. This fee is increasing between 30 and 50% over the last 2 years. This was once an insignificant closing cost. At the time of transfer of real estate is now becoming a very significant cost. Favorable tax laws encourage people to sell their homes and reinvest them in another home. What this does is drive that cost up even higher, and somewhere down the line, someone in the chain of commerce is losing out. Someone that was paying about $700 or $800 is now paying about $1,500 in realty transfer fees. At some store, a refrigerator is not being purchased. At some carpet store, carpeting is not being purchased. We are removing from the stream of commerce disposable dollars, making it impossible for people like my son and your children to buy homes in the state of New Jersey. With favorable mortgage rates disappearing day by day now, realty transfer fees are putting that much further buyers away from the opportunity of fulfilling the American dream. I think this not only affects residential home buyers, but I think it affects business people too. We're making it more and more difficult for businesses to remain in the state of New Jersey, to provide jobs, to pay those taxes that we're trying to fund our budget with. I am 100% against this bill, and I'll be voting no.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman DeCroce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill.
This bill, in view of the fact that just last year we had an increase in the realty transfer fee, and now another increase, this bill is going to do a lot of harm to those people who are trying to save a few extra dollars to get ahead, frankly, and try to purchase something that might be more amenable to them in an area that they might want to go. Beyond that, it's going to hurt a lot of people who are in the business of selling real estate, whether it be developers or realtors or whatever it may be, because it's going to be an added cost. It's going to have to be tacked on, and all we're doing is tacking on to the purchasers out there who might be interested in purchasing a home, which may eventually limit their qualifications, too, as far as purchasing. So, this bill, frankly, causes, in my opinion, some harm to the small guys. If you were selling a house in New Jersey last year that sold for roughly around $350,000, you'd have been paying about with the increase that we brought on last year, you'd have been paying around $1,700 or $1,800 in realty transfer fees. This year, with the increase, we're going to be paying at least another $500 more, to the tune of about $2,200. You have to remember, the industry in New Jersey, both the real estate industry, the development industry, which frankly has been demonized by this administration, has been the backbone of the economic recovery in the state of New Jersey. And without that, these continued efforts on the part of developers, investors, homeowners, and the monies that they may lose by virtue of these real estate transfer fees, lesser amounts of income will be going out to revitalize our economy. So, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that we would think twice about the way we tax our people and, frankly, harm the way that they may be saving and investing in the future. I think it's going to curtail an awful lot of that. I think a lot of people are going to be leaving the state of New Jersey, and I think it's going to hurt us with regard to income coming in for the state. So with that, I advise we all not support this particular bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assembly Hall Stoffel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, as many of us do practice law in this chamber, we see people come in. When they come to closings, oftentimes, they're there with their last penny, unfortunately. And today, with the cost of housing in the state of New Jersey, I think the last thing we should be doing, quite candidly, is raising realty transfer fees. Once again, we went through this last year. But more importantly, when times are good, that's when we talk about cutting taxes, but it doesn't necessarily flow that when times are bad, we should be increasing taxes. We're going in the wrong direction. It's an old saw that's been used many times, but it's as accurate today as when it was first spoken, and that is the power to tax is the power to destroy. We are now running a list of different businesses, enterprises, professions, purchases, that we're going to slowly but surely destroy in the state of New Jersey. Increasing the realty transfer tax, not only on the sellers, but something new. We're going to tax buyers now, which is completely unique. And again, New Jersey will go to the top of the list as being one of these unique states. We're going down the wrong road. And quite candidly, it's also been said that it's delightful and a privilege to spend other people's money. That I don't agree with. I think that's exactly what we're doing with this bill, and I would urge my colleagues to think before they use this means to try and close the budget gaps that they have. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple of questions for the sponsor, if he would yield.
Of course, Sponsor yield.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Through the Speaker, it's been stated, but I want to be clear by some of the folks who've spoken before me. The real estate transfer tax that we're talking about today in this bill, who is going to be paying it?
The seller pays the realty transfer tax. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
So the seller pays it. Is there any provision in the bill that has anybody other than the seller paying it?
Yeah, the 1%. Yes, there is, Assemblyman, and through you, Mr. Speaker, there is a 1% cost of sale by the purchaser for any home over $1 million.
And that transaction that would be $1 million home, that there's a $10,000 fee for the buyer, is there also a fee for the seller in that transaction?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, yes, there is. There's a transfer, the same realty transfer tax we just spoke about before.
So the cost to that transaction would be how much?
It would be 1% of the sale price for the purchaser and the realty transfer fee for whatever the price of the home was.
So through the Speaker, that could be very close to $20,000?
Depends on, obviously, the value of the home over $1 million, Assemblyman, but certainly it could be.
And through the Speaker, where does this money go on this new increase in the real estate transfer fee?
Through the Speaker, this money goes to the general fund.
Through the Speaker, to the sponsor, do you know the average cost of a house in New Jersey?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the average, there are two housing ways to look at it. One is new construction, and one is currently built. Current built residential resale is $303,000, and new construction is $382,000, and we learned that in committee the other day. Just to put that in perspective, Assemblyman, last year, new construction price in New Jersey was $356,000, grew by 10% in this past year to $382,000.
Thank you. I asked that question through the Speaker to define roughly where the limits was on this bill for its line in the sand on where it begins at $350,000. Thank you, Assemblyman, and on the bill.
Thank you.
On the bill.
What we have here is another series of taxes on the middle class. And as Assemblyman Bramnick so eloquently said a couple of bills ago, it has always been promoted that the other side of the aisle were the people of compassion and the people who care deeply about the middle class. And this bill, along with the series of bills we'll be talking about on the road to the budget later this evening, are all taxes on the middle class. The average price of a home between $320,000 and $380,000. While it sounds like a lot of money to somebody perhaps in Arkansas, it can sound like an enormous amount of money for other folks in the country. In New Jersey, it's just the regular home in New Brunswick. And those are the folks who are middle-class folks who will be selling to either buy a new home, selling because they need a bigger home because their family's growing, selling because the rest of the taxes were too high and they choose to move someplace else. Perhaps those are the people we're chasing out. The point is, this is just another series of attacks on the middle class. We are not here to help the middle class. This is not a bill for the middle class. This is a bill at the middle class. And this bill should not be passed today. And the folks, as they understand and people move forward, as they start their transactions, after they start talking to their lawyer and their real estate agent, and they are told how much of their transaction now is just miraculously being sent to the state, and they find out their fee to the state that does nothing to their or for their home is higher than their inspection, higher than their legal costs. It's getting to be one of the highest costs on their closing statement, and they will remember that you have taken that money from them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One question for the sponsor, if I may.
Would the sponsor yield?
Of course, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblyman, through the Speaker. How much money approximately is this tax expected to raise?
$74 million. Through you, Mr. Speaker, $74 million out of the realty transfer, an additional $24 million from the 1%.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that.
An additional $24 million from the 1%.
So the total figure would be?
Approximately $100 million.
$100 million. Thank you very much. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, as the sponsor has just indicated, this particular tax hike is going to raise approximately $100 million for the general fund based on a tax on homeowners in New Jersey. The same homeowners that we always tell that we're so concerned about property taxes. Mr. Speaker, this is only one of about 17 different tax hikes that are being visited upon the people of New Jersey today or have been visited on them recently. The total burden, Mr. Speaker, approaches $2 billion in additional taxes this year. That's a staggering number. And over the past 3 years, Mr. Speaker, including this bill today, that burden has increased on the people of New Jersey by $5 billion, nearly $5 billion. Mr. Speaker, what are we doing to this state? What are we doing to the people of this state? No one in this state has had an income increase over the past several years that enables them to stand off this kind of additional burden. This is wrong, Mr. Speaker. Everyone here knows it's wrong. For this House to go spend the money we're spending and to levy those kinds of additional taxes on top of what were already very significant taxes in the first place is just simply unconscionable. Again, Mr. Speaker, we should be ashamed. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Asolina.
Mr. Speaker, I ask a question to sponsor through you.
Will the sponsor yield?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker.
I have an intern sitting here, and his father died a few years ago, and if his mother dies, she's going to pass on the home to him. Would there be a transfer tax for that?
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Assemblyman, I'm sorry, I had a little trouble understanding your question. If I could ask you to repeat it.
Okay. The young man here, his father died, left the house completely to the mother. When the mother dies, she's going to pass the house over to him, and it may be worth $1 million or so. Will he have to pay a transfer tax for that?
Assemblyman, if he sells the house, he
Not
will.
selling it,
If he sells the house, he will have to pay a realty transfer fee.
but not if it's
Yesterday
transferred.
or today.
Not if it's transferred over under inheritance, though, right?
You're on inheritance, Assemblyman?
It's talking about his mother will not sell it. His mother will in the estate will give it to him.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize.
Will there be a transfer tax for that kind of?
Can you repeat the question, Assemblyman? He's having trouble understanding the question.
Okay. When the mother dies and the house is left this young man, will he have to pay a realtor transfer tax?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, I believe not. That would fall under our inheritance issues, and that's a different issue, not pertaining to this bill.
Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill.
I think, again, this is another tax on the middle class. And today we've talked about a lot of other bills that were taxing a lot of little people or average people. And it's going to be a hard state to live in. This used to be a great state to live in, but now we're taxing every movement a person makes, everything a person does. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Malone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just have a couple of quick questions of my good friend, Assemblyman Cryan.
Assemblyman Cryan.
Speaker, thank you.
Assemblyman, for all of the transfer realty tax, including this anticipated hike, what is the purpose for all of the realty transfer tax other than general fund? Is there any other use for that money?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the existing tax, Assemblyman, has a variety of issues. It funds counties. It funds a variety of different things. This particular, on this bill, would pertain to the general fund.
On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill.
My son had the opportunity just within the last few months to purchase a home from a family whose mother had gone into a nursing home, an elderly lady. The only thing she had basically was the house. They were in desperate need of funds to put her in the nursing home. I look at that, and I know it's under the old formula, but it would be increased under the new formula. For us to be taking money away from elderly people or senior citizens just to put into our general fund for no specific valuable purpose, I think is not what we're about. I don't think it's something we should be doing. I don't think that the long list of taxes today are in good keeping with the citizens of the state of New Jersey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Russo.
This is on the bill.
On the bill.
When I
saw this bill in one of the committees a number of months ago. Unfortunately, the first thing I thought of, which I hadn't thought of in about 14 years, was the heavy truck tax. And most of the people in this House were not here then. Especially with regard to the tax that's being levied here on sales of $1 million or more. A number of years ago, the majority at that time levied a tax that was very similar at that time to what the federal government did. And I know that many of you may laugh or whatever, but the government sometimes is so out of sync with regard to levies and raises. We have, unfortunately, the power to tax out of business. That happened at the federal level with the yacht tax, and at the same time, this House, this legislature, passed a heavy truck tax. Within 1 year, it was repealed by this House and by the Senate. I don't know if you understand how unprecedented this tax is, more in many ways than many of the other ones that the majority is doing today. First, this is billed as a real estate transfer tax, and some people have made the argument, well, the real estate transfer tax was something enacted in 1975. It hasn't been changed until last year. Technically true, practically untrue. Why? Because the real estate transfer tax has risen inexorably over the years. Why? Because it was tied to the prices of the properties. So it increased year after year, even before last year's majority increase. This year we're increasing it again. But we're doing something else, which I can't understand, and I'm not going to, out of respect for the sponsors, I'm not asking any questions. But again, as some of us in this House do, I do this kind of work. This, in essence, is a mortgage tax, just like New York. That's what we've come to. On the $1 million houses, which are not necessarily in this market rich people anymore, okay? On $1 million sales, the tax is being levied against the buyer, not the seller. The public is fairly smart. When they catch on to this, you're going to see a lot of sales at $999,000 and $349,000. And they won't have to call us or OLS to figure that out. That's the first thing you're going to see. You're going to see underground sales on this. The second thing is, at a house closing, and we're all complaining about our kids or our friends and everybody having to spend another $10,000, you're going to have to get a check from the buyer for $10,000. And you can all say to me, well, everybody knows, Dave, that they're going to increase the price to cover it. But you still have to now get the check. And that's going to be real interesting, whoever drafted this. Because that's something we've never done. But this, in essence, is a New York mortgage tax, which they have done for years, which is one of the major advantages we have over here, which we've never wanted to do, but we're in essence doing it. I think this is going to be a tax that is going to be very, very hard to collect. I think there is going to be a public outcry, especially on that portion of it. And I suggest that every member in this House be prepared for that, because this happened 14 years ago, and it's going to be basically indefensible. It's impractical, and it's going to be very difficult to argue with the amount of money that's going to be raised. There are a million different ways that could have been raised by the majority. This one, I think, is going to be figured out by the public really quickly. And this is, again, the middle-class public. This is not millionaires. This is not a millionaire's income tax. This is on properties that have inflated through inflation. And these people, buyers and sellers, have been paying increased realty transfer taxes. You're going to see major problems with this. Again, I suggest you rethink this, not only the concept, but the method of collection. Very impractical. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Gibson.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Arise in opposition to this bill. This is the second time in 2 years that we've increased the realty transfer tax. And it's the first time that we breached who pays the tax. For the first time, now the buyer also participates in being taxed. these homes, new homes, they've already paid sales taxes for the materials that went into these homes. Those people that make a profit on the sale, they will be paying income tax on the capital gains from this sale. I believe this legislation, more than many of the other taxes that we are opposing this afternoon, will have a negative impact on the state of New Jersey, and it will most particularly have a negative impact on my district. So I will be opposing this tax.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Panaccio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, we're hearing about all these taxes, but we don't need this tax. We don't need any of these taxes, quite frankly. New Jersey doesn't have a tax problem. New Jersey has a spending problem. We're spending 17% more in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, than was previously spent. We don't need an additional tax. We have to put ourselves on a fiscal diet. We have to stop spending, and we have to stop spending now.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Conover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill?
On the bill.
Middle-class family in New Jersey buys a new home in 2004. They start paying their property tax, their income tax. They feel pretty good. They buy a new car. They pay the sales tax and the tire tax. Then they realize to pay the taxes, they might have to start a part-time business that may lose money, so they have to pay the minimum corporate business tax. They have to pay the phone tax.
Assemblyman.
Mr. Speaker, could we say somewhat on the bill, please?
Assemblyman.
I'll get to the point very quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The breadwinner gets so nervous he takes up smoking and pays a cigarette tax. They finally get fed up. They have to move out of the state of New Jersey, and we insult them with a realty transfer fee as they sell their house.
Assemblyman.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are taxing the American dream. We cannot tax New Jersey into prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. Don't get excited. I don't know. Madam Clerk, close the machine.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3115.
Boys. Madam Clerk, continue.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3115 has received 41 votes in the affirmative, 36 votes in the negative, and no abstentions.
Assembly Bill 3115, having received 41 votes in the affirmative, 36 votes in the negative, and no abstention, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course to pass bills. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3118, sponsored by Assemblyman Greenwald, imposes annual air toxin surcharge based on emissions at certain facilities.
Assemblyman Greenwald.
It says Roberts. I don't know if you want him to.
What is it?
Come on.
I don't want to steal his thunder. I am happy to move the bill.
Madam Clerk, open the sheet for a vote. All recorded wish to be recorded. Properly recorded. Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3118 has received 42 votes in the affirmative, 34 votes in the negative, and no abstentions.
Assembly Bill 3118, having received 42 votes in the affirmative, 34 votes in the negative, and no abstention, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course of passed bills. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3125, sponsored by Assemblyman Cryan, imposes 6% gross receipts tax on certain cosmetic medical procedures.
Assemblyman Roberts.
No, that's not it.
Wrong Irishman, Mr. Speaker. He's over here. And Mr. Speaker, I move the bill.
You look like you. No. Assemblyman Cryan moves the bill.
100 pounds from that.
Assemblyman Bodine.
Answer, please.
Will the sponsor yield?
And I'm sorry to hear you. Okay, of course, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblyman, I have some questions regarding the cosmetics. If I go to a dentist and have a bleaching process done on my teeth, is that considered cosmetic?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I believe that wouldn't be included under this bill.
If I have, through you, Mr. Speaker, if I have caps now, and one of the caps are broken, and it's determined that it can be replaced with another cap, is that also considered cosmetic?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, no, it would not be. For example, Assemblyman, if you had to have reconstructive surgery for an injury and you had to have teeth reimplanted, that would be medically necessary and therefore would not fit under the coverage of this bill. The example that you just gave of caps being replaced would not be under the purview of the bill because it's to improve a function. It's not a cosmetic improvement, which is the intention of the bill.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to an oral hygienist who cleans teeth, is that considered cosmetic?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, no, it is not.
Thank you. Let me switch over to a dermatologist. If I have some lesions on my skin and the dermatologist determines that they're not precancerous, but maybe it'd be in the best interest to remove them with liquid nitrogen, is that considered
Are you having problem hearing this, Mr. Cryan?
I do.
Would the members of the House please come to order? Mr. Cryan is having difficulty hearing the questions.
And through you, Mr. Speaker, if I may ask the good Assemblyman to please repeat his question.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I had trouble hearing you, Assemblyman. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's quite all right. I understand. An oral hygienist who cleans teeth, specifically just cleans the teeth, is that considered cosmetic?
No, it is not.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Speaker, if I have a dental plan or a medical plan, and I have, let's say, a $5 copay, and the fee is $100, what is the percentage calculated on?
Okay, it's six. Through you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, it would be 6% of what you were charged. So, you being nice enough to use $100 as an example, 6% would be $6.
It would be $6.
Yes, Assemblyman.
So then I would be actually paying $6 tax and a $5 copay.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, in answering your question, the answer would be yes, but as a general rule, Assemblyman, insurance does not cover the type of thing that you're talking about, and as a result, the copay wouldn't be applicable.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill.
I'd just like to express my concerns that for the medical and dental field, this is going to be a burden to them. It may require additional personnel be hired in their office or utilizing outside source in the form of accounting, and which those costs would be passed on in the form of fees. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Assemblyman Panaccio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield for one question?
Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Assemblyman. Just one question because I want to be absolutely clear on this. If a woman decides to change her appearance and have a breast augmentation, will the state of New Jersey impose a tax on that procedure?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, yes, they would at 6%.
Thank you.
Assemblyman DeCroce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question to the sponsor, if you will.
Mr. Klein?
Of course, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Assemblyman, through you, Mr. Speaker, there are people who are interested in improving their features one way or another, mainly usually younger people, and they're not cheap. These things are very expensive. I can tell you for a fact that I know of someone who went through about $35,000 to $40,000. Are you saying that a job like that, a cosmetic improvement, which would help that person's appearance so he might be able to do better getting jobs, being socially involved, a person like that would have to pay as much as 6%?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I would also first off say, Assemblyman, that if someone feels or is discriminated against in any way via appearance, they should note that and take the proper legal steps. However, this is a cosmetic bill, and it's for cosmetic things only, not medically necessary, and therefore there would be a 6% fee. Yes, sir.
You're saying they would not?
They would, Assemblyman, yes. Let me be very clear. This bill is applicable to cosmetic...
Could the House come to order, please?
All right. It is... I apologize. It is... To answer your question, Assemblyman, the answer is yes.
Yes?
Yes, Assemblyman. For you, Mr. Speaker.
It's expensive for you, Mr. Speaker. And someone with a youngster that might be going to a dental clinic for braces for their youngster, let's say most braces probably run anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000, I would guess. I don't know if it's more or less. They would be charged a 6% fee on that as well? For a youngster?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, no, they would not, because the braces would there to be restore a medically necessary function to improve a function, therefore would not be applicable under this bill.
That's interesting. But if they were to, as someone mentioned earlier, to improve the sheen on their teeth or something like that, that would be considered to be a cosmetic improvement.
Let's be clear. If you did the whitening issue that we talked about earlier, which is through you, Mr. Speaker, which is cosmetic in scope, that would be applied under this bill. If you were to do your regular dentist cleaning as part of your maintenance, it would not be.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, through you, this is...
on the bill?
On the bill, sir, of course. This is a bill that, despite what we may think, may be very costly to certain people because they may want to do things to improve themselves one way or another cosmetically. And with the cost of the medical costs involved may be so high that these people will be limited in what they may be able to spend, and the tax is going to be excessive. 6% to improve your looks, your arms, whatever it may be, whatever a dermatologist may say may be necessary. I really think that's excessive. I don't think this is a bill we should be supporting. I don't even know we're going to do the 6%, other than the fact we'll probably put it in the general fund and use it for God knows what. I think it's more important for the people that need that help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeCroce. Assemblyman Keene.
I'm sorry, my question was answered. Thank you.
Assemblywoman McCose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a few questions for the sponsor through you.
Through the Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, of course, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Assemblyman, do you know the percentage of cosmetic surgery that is incurred by women versus men?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, no, I do not. I do know there's a varied amount of cosmetic surgeries that are applicable to both genders.
It would seem to me on the bill, Mr. Speaker, it would seem to me that this bill is inequitable and discriminatory a discriminatory burden on women, because I believe that the statistics that I have show that more women than men partake in plastic surgery, whether it be for a scar incurred by an accident or another procedure as a result of prior surgery. But I really feel that this is a new classification of taxation that just opens the door to an unheard of number of taxes that we may see in the future. And as a person who had braces twice, I realize that braces don't fall under this, but I can see already in the future the possibility of procedures like orthodontics falling under this. So it is for that reason that I will oppose this bill today. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of questions for the sponsor, if he'd yield.
Brian, a couple of questions?
Questions.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Speaker, yes, of course.
This bill is a little new to us through the Speaker, so I want to get some specificity as to exactly what kind of is and isn't covered without directly asking some of the questions that have already been asked. First, you've been asked about a number of procedures, and it appears the gist of the bill is that if it is somewhat medically necessary, that would be classified as necessity and would not be taxed. And if it was purely for some form of cosmetic enhancement, that it probably would be taxed.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Essentially, Assemblyman, that is correct. For example, the previous speaker noted plastic scars for reconstruction. That would not be covered here because that would be a repair of a current condition. So that particular example is incorrect. But in your gist, you are correct.
Since I haven't read the bill, does the bill literally specify what is and isn't covered by procedure, or is it going to be delegated to some other entity to determine what should be taxed or not, or will it be turned over to taxation to determine who would be taxed or not?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'll quote from the bill, Assemblyman, and see if that gives you some comfort level. The definition of cosmetic surgery, which is on the bill.
Hold on, Mr. Klein. If we could get a little attention, this might clear up a lot of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, Assemblyman, directing my answer to you. Cosmetic surgery means the surgical reshaping of normal structures on the body to improve the body image, self-esteem, or appearance of an individual. So there is one definition for you. It also has cosmetic medical procedures. What that means, that is a medical procedure performed on an individual directed at improving the procedure's subject appearance and does not meaningfully promote the proper function of the body or prevent or treat illness or disease. And Assemblyman, there is more. If you choose, I would be happy to.
No, I think that gives me a basis of where I want to go. And through the Speaker, none of those definitions directly mention any dentistry, and I did only have one other dental question. You noted that braces for children, because it's a formative situation, clearly would be not taxed. What would you think the language of the bill would do for an adult who chose later in life to have braces and perhaps enhance their appearance?
Assemblyman, through you, Mr. Speaker, if I may, perhaps it would be helpful if I read you this section that deals with dentistry. Perhaps my colleagues
I would
in the House.
appreciate that.
Reconstructive surgery or dentistry, which, by the way, is the 4th or 5th paragraph in the bill, includes any surgery or dentistry performed on abnormal structures by or related to congenital defects, developmental abnormalities, trauma, infection, tumors, or disease, including procedures to improve function or to give a more normal appearance. So, for example, Assemblyman, in what you just utilized, which I believe is braces for adults, that would not fall under this procedure just based on the definition I read.
I may have misheard you, but it appeared that what you were articulating
Those are things that are excluded, Assemblyman, if I didn't make myself particularly clear.
Those were things excluded.
Excluded. They're specifically excluded, and through you, Mr. Speaker, they are specifically excluded in the bill.
I don't want to go back to the bill and and necessarily go over individual issues. One of the purpose, through the Speaker, of this questioning is the next question, which is, that is just language. And that is language that ultimately is going to have to be determined procedure by procedure. Through the Speaker, who is going to be the entity collecting this tax?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the answer is the Division of Taxation, Treasurer's Office.
So, as I so note through the Chair, the term used is a gross receipts tax. Will this be collected by the same division that collects sales tax?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, yes, it will.
So in essence, this is a sales tax being imposed on the medical profession. Would that be a correct assumption?
It's a fee utilized for those that tend to and make the option of cosmetic surgery available to themselves, unnecessary procedures for a variety of reasons. You should also note, and I want you to be very clear, Assemblyman, as to where these fees are going to. These fees are going to be utilized to fund charity care, ladies and gentlemen, so that we're clear. It will actually go into the health care subsidy fund that will be utilized to fund charity care.
Thank you, but through the Chair, I'll go back to the original question. The question was, will this be the first sales tax imposed upon the medical profession? While I appreciate all that information, I still take it as a yes. It is a tax, and through the Chair, this is a question. It is a tax. It is imposed on the Department of Taxation. It will be collected by the Department of Taxation as if it were a sales tax. Is that correct?
The 6% figure, it's a gross receipts tax, Assemblyman.
Mr. Speaker, could we...
Could we please, especially in this corner over here,
It's our fault.
I'm having a very hard time hearing Mr. Gregg. I think your colleagues would like all of us to hear you.
Well, I appreciate that. Perhaps it's echo from the other side. Staying in that vein, having a little familiarity with sales taxes, I know you do through the Speaker, that it is my understanding when the Department of Taxation collects sales tax, they have to promulgate the literal lists and policies and methodology in how that tax would be collected. So they're not capable of using the language that you articulated from your bill. They're going to actually have to develop a list of things so these doctors and dentists and folks who offer these procedures will know exactly which one to tax and not. Is that true?
Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I believe that is reasonable.
Now, are there any other procedures, and I've made this a statement, are there any procedures, medical procedures at all that you're aware of that are taxed by the state as a sales tax today?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, not to my knowledge.
Is there anything in the bill at all that will give any guidance to the medical profession on how they might be able to do their billing or pay their taxes?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I sure hope they know how to pay their taxes now, Assemblyman.
It's good to know through the Chair that it's not retroactive.
No.
So in essence, the answer to the question is that ultimately, if this bill is passed, that the Department of Taxation will have to come up with a procedure for the medical profession for the first time so they will be able to determine which procedure to which person on any given time or day, looking at the age and the type of procedure and whatever it is, they're going to have a finite list for the medical profession, and they will have to do that before this bill can be implemented.
Is that a question? Is that a question, Assemblyman?
Yes, that was a question. I got it.
Okay. Question.
Do you want me to do it again?
No.
Okay. Through the Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through the Chair. Assemblyman, that is a Division of Taxation's job, and I think it's reasonable to expect that there'll be boundaries drawn within the limits of the language of the bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblyman. I'll go on the bill just briefly.
On the bill.
I think this is another one of these pieces of legislation today that you see the tip of the iceberg when you see the legislation itself and the title. where I think a lot of folks, when they saw this bill on our side of the aisle, and maybe on your side of the aisle, saw this as just a sales tax on certain services, something we don't normally tax in the state of New Jersey. It certainly is going to open the door up to taxing any number of other services, but more importantly, these are medical procedures. These are very personal procedures for people, and it's a very exorbitant tax. Even if you're not so sure that that's wrong, the idea, the complexity that this is going to bring to the taxation department in their collection, and the burden that it will bring to the medical profession, because their job has never been determining who should get this and not get this, and pay tax and not pay tax. It's going to put them at odds with their patients, because people are going to go, why am I paying tax? It's a medical procedure. And those good doctors are going to have to say and make a decision, can I call this required or not required? And I should defer to my good learned doctors and let them speak after me. But those are tough decisions doctors are going to make. And are people going to say, if I'm going to do a procedure, is it easier for me to go into New York, where I don't have to pay a tax? Is it easier for me to go to Philadelphia, where there are fine medical people who can do these same procedures? So are we putting our own great medical people in the state of New Jersey who've chosen to live here, buy their houses here, and telling them that it would be easier to go to New York or other places to have these surgeries done? Quite frankly, I think it's bad policy to tax the medical industry. I don't care how badly you think you need the money. This is another one of those bills that is creating divisiveness. It's about whether this is a really needed medical procedure, maybe a needed procedure, should be a medical procedure, has to be a medical procedure. These are things that should be left to the doctor and the person, in my view. And I'm very surprised that we would be looking at this today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Assemblyman Munoz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have questions for the sponsor, Phil Yield.
Brian? Of course, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should actually step around and be able to see you better. I want to just read the definitions and then ask you a question. I know you've read both definitions. First, it says cosmetic surgery means the surgical reshaping of normal structures on the body to improve the body image, self-esteem, or appearance of an individual. And next, it says reconstructive surgery or dentistry includes any surgery or dentistry performed on abnormal structures caused by or related to congenital defects, developmental abnormalities, trauma, infection, tumors, or disease, including procedures to improve function or give a more normal appearance. Now, I would actually ask the question that was asked before, and I appreciate your answer. There's an operation called a bilateral breast augmentation. That's actually the name of the operation. It's got a lot of lay names, and it's done pretty commonly in New Jersey and across the country. Tell me, if you look at these definitions, how would you define a breast augmentation operation? Because it seems to fit both categories.
Through the Speaker.
Through the Speaker, yeah, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to answer your question, Assemblyman. And I'm going to re-emphasize the fact that I do not have your medical background.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you now.
I'm going to re-emphasize the fact that I do not have your medical background, and certainly with my indulgence to that. For example, Assemblyman, I think it's probably best laid that way. Should someone be unfortunate enough to be in a position, or hopefully where they're recovering from a breast surgery situation or a mastectomy, that reconstructive surgery would not be covered under this bill, clearly. Should someone look for, as you mentioned, augmentation, I believe was the term used, that would be covered under this bill if it was purely for cosmetic reasons.
Well, and again, follow-up question. You know, as a physician and surgeon, I would certainly say that the way we answer as a legislature or government, that question could be really important to a lot of women. I'll go back to what Assemblywoman McCoe said. I mean, it is likely that many more women have procedures that might fall in these categories. Next question is this. Who decides, besides you, who decides, and the governor, who decides which category an operation fits into?
Through the Speaker.
Through the Speaker, of course, Mr. Speaker. Distinguished Speaker.
Through the Speaker. As you know, that was literally just asked and answered through Assemblyman Gregg, that those will be promulgated through regulations, probably through the Division of Taxation.
So someone in taxation will decide what medical procedures are covered or not covered, if I hear you correctly?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, let's not make more of it than what it is. The bill is pretty clear. You gave an example of breast augmentation. If someone wants to walk in and enlarge on a cosmetic reason only, that clearly is cosmetic surgery. The definition's pretty clear. It's also quite clear when a woman is recovering from the difficulties of a mastectomy and needs reconstruction surgery. So let's be clear. Most of the parameters, the definitions are quite clear. Let's not make it or spin it somehow so that the Division of Taxation is going to define medical policy in the state of New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, question to the sponsor. I would submit, actually, if you look at, there's many conditions that could be classified. So you might portray it as being simple. This could get very complicated and very gray. Let me ask another question then. Another question is, I happen to be a physician. I'm a surgeon. Now, I normally don't collect the tax in my office. Let's say I was doing one of these procedures. So would now I have to start collecting from patients that came to see me a tax? Is that the way it would work?
For you, Mr. Speaker, yes.
So, all right. So I guess I have my medical training. I know how to collect the tax. Now, then the costs of that, collecting that tax, if I have to have personnel or something, I just assume those costs myself?
For you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, I don't know your practice, but I'm going to assume that somewhere in the line of your practice that you either collect or pay some sort of tax, and just like every other citizen in the state of New Jersey. And I would expect that you'd be able to handle this. You have my full confidence that you would have the ability to be able to handle this function.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. I'd like to speak on the bill.
On the bill.
You know, I actually don't know what to say. This is actually a really bad bill. It gets you into some serious issues. To actually portray this as being fairly simple is really ridiculous. It really is. And you'll see as you try to implement this kind of a proposal, it will become a real big issue. The other thing is, it's likely that it's going to have gender ramifications. So don't think that you're not going to start hearing about difficulties people have and whether in some way we're discriminating, etc. The other thing it's sure to do is start to affect access to health care and the cost of health care. So as I said before, these are related. And by this taxation, we're going to start to affect access and availability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Munoz. Assemblyman Azzolina.
Mr. Speaker, a question to the sponsor, please.
Mr. Crime?
Yeah. I know some extremely heavy people, 400 pounds or more. They have an operation in their stomach to cut down on their weight. Would they be taxed for that? That's cosmetic.
No, through you, Mr. Speaker, many would consider obesity to be a health-related issue.
I can't hear you.
There we go. I apologize for that, Assemblyman. Through you, Mr. Speaker, obesity would be defined as an illness and therefore would not be considered under this. Of course,
okay.
20 pounds I have may not be.
Another question, Mr. Speaker, through you.
Hold on a second. I can barely hear you myself up here. Folks, please.
Yeah.
Mr. Azzolina.
Nice. Another question, Mr. Speaker, to the sponsor. How about where the cosmetic surgery on your teeth and whitening of your teeth, is that taxed?
Assemblyman, through the Speaker, and we did discuss this before, Assemblyman Bodine in particular spoke about it. If you were to whiten your teeth, for example, on a cosmetic basis because you choose for them to look better, that would be covered under this bill and you would be required to pay the 6% gross receipts tax. If you were, for example, to put on braces on a young child, that would not be covered.
Well, like I went to the dentist, I'm not sure if I want to go through all this trouble. I got some teeth that are in bad shape in the front, but he wanted to take a whole batch out on me. I said, forget it. But would they be taxed? That would make me look better. But it would give me better teeth.
Assemblyman, if it's a function, for example, the replacement of teeth, that would not be covered under here. But I've seen you smile once or twice. You look okay back here.
Oh, thank you very much. On the bill.
On the bill.
I just think I said it earlier, we're taxing everything. Anything to make people look good now we're going to tax. And if we don't, pretty soon people, maybe another year you'll double the tax or somebody will double the tax. People might get fed up. We want people to look better and better. They may change their mind and decide not to do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Azzolina. Assemblyman Wolf.
Don't do it. Yes, Mr. Speaker, question for the sponsor?
Mr. Klein, will you yield? Of course, Mr. Speaker.
We've had a rather interesting discussion for the last half an hour or so, and we've actually talked about many conditions that are very, very serious. Assemblyman Azzolina just brought up an issue that I wanted to follow up on, and that is liposuction. Would liposuction be considered a cosmetic, or would that be considered in the same category as stapling of the stomach?
For you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, I think that's really going to depend on each particular situation. There are those who do not have health risks for whatever the reason, that it may not be particularly for and would be cosmetic under their idea of appearance. However, Assemblyman, as you know, as many of us know, obesity is a growing national crisis, a crisis here in New Jersey, a growing problem here in New Jersey as well. The particular health-related functions, whether it be cholesterol, high blood pressure, and all those things, if it was determined to be a medically necessary procedure, Assemblyman, it therefore would be excluded from this bill.
Mr. Wolf? That's it? Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Assemblyman Sakadakis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. May the sponsor yield for a couple questions?
Mr. Klein. Certainly, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblyman, through the Speaker, how much anticipated revenue is expected to be raised by this tax on cosmetic surgery?
For you, Mr. Speaker, $30 million.
$30 million. If we do our math, how was this figure arrived? What information was used to come up with a $30 million revenue stream?
For you, Mr. Speaker, this figure was arrived at through the Department of Treasury and an accounting of particular procedures and what that would be from previous history.
Through the Speaker, in other words, there's an inventory of these type of cosmetic procedures that the medical society or the medical profession has an inventory?
For you, Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is yes.
So if you want to raise, through the Speaker, $30 million, I guess we're talking about $500 million worth of these type of procedures during the year.
I'll defer to your math.
Well, I haven't been in school in a while, but I think maybe the decimal point is
that's correct.
Anyway.
It's actually, to be candid, it's $507 million less.
I think all of us are asking the question, why do we decide upon taxing medical procedures such as cosmetic procedures? This to me is very reminiscent of a sales tax we put on toilet paper a long time ago, and hopefully this sales tax will go through the same route that tax did many years ago. Thank you.
For you, Mr. Do you want to respond to that?
There was no question.
Is that a question? For you, Mr. Speaker, this is not a sales tax on toilet paper. As a matter of fact, we need to remember today that cosmetic surgery is an option. And what we're talking about here is optional cosmetic surgery that improves the appearance of people. Optional. A choice. We also need to realize that in today's growing medical environment, it is not tilted to one particular gender. There's no statistics that show that. This is an optional requirement on gross receipts for the state of New Jersey. Thank you.
Mr. Bramick. Is it on?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question I asked with the sponsor
Klein? Of course, Mr. Speaker.
My friend Assemblyman Cryan.
My friend Assemblyman Bramick.
This being one of the many taxes initiated by your caucus, the question I have, when you had these discussions, have there been any discussions in cutting our benefits, showing leadership in terms of restraining what we do? Has that been part of the discussion at all before we tax the general public?
I tell you, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, but through you, John, can you give me that one again?
Okay, let me ask you. The question is this. Tomorrow morning, the state of New Jersey will feel taxes on tires, taxes on real estate, and taxes on cosmetic surgery. The question I have is simple. As leaders, don't we have the responsibility to cut some of our own benefits, whether they be pensions, whether it be salaries, whether it be perks, before we impose all of these new taxes on the state of New Jersey?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, I'm not sure how much on the bill we actually are in that discussion, but I will tell you again, Assemblyman, the purpose of this bill is to fund charity care. A problem, a crisis here in the state, something I'm very proud that this caucus has taken a leadership role to help those who can't help themselves. We've taken that responsibility. When you hopefully vote for this bill on optional cosmetic surgery, you will be help providing, along with a series of bills today, full funding for charity care. That's something I'm proud to stand here and say, something I know the members of my caucus are as well.
On the bill.
On the bill.
I don't know if it's been 10, 11, 12 new taxes, but it seems to me that one of the reasons the public loses confidence in their leaders, because not 1 ounce of energy, not 1 moment of discussion has been dedicated to what we are supposed to do as leaders. We are the CEOs of the state, and we've done nothing to reduce how we spend money. And I would ask us to seriously consider that tonight as we approve a budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bremick. Assemblyman Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield for questions?
Mr. Crane.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, of course I will, Assemblyman Thompson.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Speaker. I will cite a specific case, but it's critical here.
Mr. Thompson, excuse me 1 second. Could you speak a little more into the mic, please?
Okay. Critical element to this whole thing is going to be the determination whether a procedure is medically necessary or whether it is for cosmetic purposes. That will determine whether or not it is covered by this bill.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, that's correct.
So I will cite a specific case, and I'd like your opinion on it. Why? I know it well, because it happens to be myself. I recently visited a surgeon. I have all sorts of problems with my vision, my eyes. But one of the problems I have is that I have a loss of peripheral vision because of a drooping of my eyelids and so on. When I saw the surgeon, it was his recommendation that I needed to have surgery on both my eyelids, 2 procedures done, and also he felt the problem was aggravated by a drooping of the eyebrows. So he said that should also be done. But with my health care plan, which I have through the state, it is required that these procedures be approved in advance by my insurer before they're performed. So he did submit the information to the insurer. The insurer agreed that 1 eye, 2 procedures they would cover. The other eye, 1 procedure they would cover, but they would not cover the eyebrow surgery. Thus, in their opinion, these were not medically necessary. They did not meet the criteria they have established. But my doctor has said all 3 were medically necessary. Consequently, thus they will cover a portion of the work. The rest of the work I will have to pay for because, again, the health insurer said they did not meet their criteria. In addition to having to pay the surgeon for part of this, he said the facility he was using, which happens to be up in your area, Roseland, there would also be a charge there, maybe about $600 for additional anesthesia, etc. So my question is this. My doctor sees these as medically necessary. My health insurer says part of them are not. So, A, would I have to pay 6% on the part that the health insurer says are not medically necessary, although my doctor does? And likewise, as far as the anesthesia, the additional $600 over there, do I have to pay on that? Which ruling are you going to take, my doctor or my health insurer?
Through the chair. Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. Assemblyman, let me try as best I can to answer your question. And what I'll refer to, Assemblyman, is something very specific in the bill, which I mentioned before. The bill specifically excludes procedures to improve function or to give, where am I? Am I in the right spot? Yeah. Or to give a more normal appearance. So, Sam, your eyebrows that make you the handsome fellow that you are, they would be excluded under this, and you'd be just fine.
No, this was not intended to improve my appearance. This was intended to improve my peripheral vision. But again, the health insurer and my physician disagree on whether it's medically necessary.
Again, Assemblyman and Mr. Speaker, through you, since it will improve the function of your eyes, it is specifically excluded from this bill. Under the example that you just gave me.
Okay, but in other words, you're saying they will take my physician's determination, not my health insurer's determination.
In the example you just cited, Assemblyman, I think that's pretty clear.
Okay. But again, I would join in with my colleagues relative to the necessity of this legislation.
Mr. Thompson, are you
On the bill.
asking another question or on the bill?
On the bill.
On the bill.
In yesterday's paper, there was a quote there from the chairman of the Budget Committee where he said, "We do not wake up..."
Please give Mr. Thompson your undivided attention.
Thank you. The chairman of the Budget Committee said, "We do not wake up in the morning saying, 'Great idea. This is who we'll tax today.'" But as I look over this bill and I look at all these taxes that are being added here today, I think there was somebody waking up every day saying, "Great idea. I think this is who we'll tax today." Thank you.
Assemblyman Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why you're picking on my district, because this bill does affect my district. I keep hearing optional. Well, it's optional to live in the state of New Jersey. It's optional to work in the state of New Jersey, and it's optional to have a business in the state of New Jersey. Those options may be limited very shortly. What we've done in the last week or the last few days with the half-a-millionaire's tax is many of the people in my district, in fact, as of yesterday, now this is on the bill, Mr. Speaker, I'm leading up to something. As of yesterday, I received a letter telling me that some of my constituents were moving out of the state. I'll have more people telling me that after this bill is passed, because one of the things that you fail to realize every damn time is that when you make this action, whether it's a cigarette tax where people go elsewhere to buy their cigarettes, whether it's a half-a-millionaire tax where people go elsewhere to make their $500,000, or it's a tax like this where you're taking doctors who are making the $500,000 and better, especially those in these particular fields where they have an option to practice, whether it be in a hospital in northern New Jersey, in Bergen County, at Englewood Hospital, at Valley Hospital, at Pascagoula Valley Hospital, or Hackensack Hospital, or they can practice in New York City, right across the bridge. They can go to those hospitals, they can live in New York, they can live in other areas and not pay these taxes. What are we doing, Mr. Speaker? We're driving people out of New Jersey. We're driving the people that supply the greatest amount of income to this state, we're driving them out. We've done it before, we're going to do it again. We have a conflict of interest in this House on this bill, because this has been called the vote tax or the boob tax, and you'd have to be a bunch of boobs to vote for this bill tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Rooney. Mr. DiGaetano.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill.
I guess today is the day for misnomers in the legislative process, because this bill is described as imposing a gross receipts tax on certain cosmetical medical procedures. Well, I will agree it's a tax. This may be the only state in the United States where this tax would qualify as a gross receipts tax. You see, Mr. Speaker, there are many states that have gross receipts taxes, and New Jersey had one. And by definition, the tax is imposed upon the aggregate of all receipts. And it is done so, Mr. Speaker, so that there is no need to differentiate between the profit or loss and the actual expense. It's kind of a catch-all. Not long ago, this legislature, this majority, imposed something called the alternative minimum assessment. That is also a gross receipts tax. But the difference between gross receipts taxes and this tax is that the entity, the company, if you will, the corporate citizen, in the case of gross receipts taxes, pays the gross receipts tax. That's what it's about, Mr. Speaker. But in this case, this tax, dubbed the gross receipts tax, is paid by the purchaser. And it's paid on the total cost to the provider. Now, if we were in England, Mr. Speaker, this would be called a value-added tax. In the United States of America and in this state, Mr. Speaker, this is nothing more than a sales tax. But, Mr. Speaker, I suspect I know why this title of gross receipts tax was applied to this procedure, these procedures. In no other case would you compute the gross receipts based on a provision of services to an individual. So, Mr. Speaker, I suspect that there's some political reason why this is dubbed a gross receipts tax, to prevent it from being called a sales tax. But what I will say about this particular tax, Mr. Speaker, in direct contradiction to the sponsor's statement that this does not in any way impact on gender, one gender more than another, I beg to differ. Because I have talked to the medical providers, at least 3, who do such procedures, Mr. Speaker. And they tell me that their clients' gender is much more weighted to females than males. Not that there are no males, but is much more weighted to women. And, Mr. Speaker, one of the processes that we talk about taxing, adding this new tax to, is hair removal. But specifically, we're talking in this bill about hair removal that's done with a laser process. Now, there are other methods of hair removal. Regularly, there are those who go to electrolysis to have hair removed. But this is carving out a separate taxation for those that have it done by laser. Mr. Speaker, this is also carving out a separate tax for those who have their varicose veins removed by laser rather than another medical procedure. I don't need to belabor this, Mr. Speaker, and I know the South has many more bills and much more important issues to debate this evening other than this bill. But let us be clear about what this is. This bill is a tax. It is a new tax. It is a tax that is not imposed currently, but will be if this bill is signed into law. It is a tax that clearly comes down heavily on women more than men. What it is, very specifically, Mr. Speaker, it is a breast augmentation tax. It is a breast reduction tax. It is a hair removal tax. It is a hair replacement tax. It is a varicose vein removal tax. And maybe worst of all, Mr. Speaker, and I say this with a smile on my face, but I'm very serious when I say it, we have now reached the ultimate low. New Jersey, when this bill is signed into law, will have a smile tax. And that is nothing to smile about, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblyman Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question or two for the sponsor.
Mr. Klein? For you, Mr. Speaker, of course.
We've heard a number of speakers indicate that the people that will have to pay this tax are somewhat disproportionate, perhaps more females than men. And as I just heard the last speaker, he talked about a number of things. I suppose when I heard one of the examples that maybe some men may decide to have a hair replacement, I've often considered it myself, but I don't think now that the 6% might go in, I'll continue to consider that. But you said the prediction is $30 million. That's based on some estimate. And since there have been a lot of speakers that said that more females will pay this tax from men, are the figures that have been provided you that do in fact provide a $30 million estimate, do they show specific types of operations, and do they show that more females will pay this tax than men?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblyman, thank you for your question. First and foremost, you should understand I do not agree that this is a gender-specific type of fee. However, it does give a breakdown of specifics, and as a matter of fact, as I just heard the good Assemblyman refer to, I believe it's a male-dominated thing for hair removal. I'm not certainly positive of that, but I think when you remove chest hair, that's probably a more male issue than female. To answer your question, I do have a specific list that goes on the basis of the $30 million figure.
And does that... Through the Speaker. And does your list and the breakdown suggest that there's more females that would undergo this tax and through these operations?
For you, Mr. Speaker, no.
The sponsor also talked about the use of this tax would go to charity care. I think that's something that we all are interested in. $30 million is probably a portion, but a rather small portion of what this House, this body will be dedicating to charity care. Can you tell me, or can you share with us how much charity care is proposed this year, where the rest of it will be coming from?
Mr. Klein, as best you can you answer
as best you can, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you, about $585 million, which comes from a variety of sources that we've discussed, including fees raised, including this today, the $30 million of that segment, Assembly.
Thank you for your responses to the sponsor. I will be opposing this bill, Mr. Speaker. I do think that it is disproportionate, and I do think that it's clouded with complications, as we've heard before, very hard to administer. Who's going to make the decisions? I think we're better off without this piece of legislation.
Assemblyman Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill, if I may.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I have given a careful reading to the terms cosmetic medical procedure and also reconstructive surgery or dentistry. If I may paraphrase those terms, one comes down to improving the subject's appearance, and the other comes down to giving a more normal appearance. Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned about the impact, the potential impact of this legislation on young families with children here in New Jersey. I have heard the Assemblyman's comments and assurances that orthodonture, braces, would not be covered. I have to tell you, as a lawyer, 30 years standing and reading that language, I am not confident that that is the result that would come from this legislation. It certainly is unclear. And when there's an ambiguity, yes, it may be decided by a regulator who issues a regulation. And in this case, the regulation is going to come out of the Division of Taxation. I have very little confidence that the Division of Taxation is going to decide that orthodonture is not fundamentally, in more cases than not, cosmetic in nature. Now, what does this mean for the average family? Let's assume you have a family that has 3 children. I know this personally because I've gone through this. You're looking at about $10,000. $10,000 in braces cost, orthodonture. Under this bill, that would result in a family, an ordinary family, having to pay $600 in tax if, as I fear, the Division of Taxation rules that most orthodonture is not reconstructive, it's really just appearance. And by the way, there is also in many cases a need for something called whitening or bleaching that follows orthodonture. I guess we'd have another fight over that one as well. I'd also have to contest one other comment that the Assemblyman made, Mr. Speaker, and that is that the Assemblyman suggested that there was experience, if you will, in inventory of procedures. Perhaps there is on the medical side, but I have been assured that on the dental side there is no such inventory of cosmetic procedures. So I think it's very difficult to know what the real cost is going to be. Another issue, Mr. Speaker, is that this tax is going to be unique to New Jersey. As we all know, it will not apply in New York State, it will not apply in Pennsylvania, it will not apply in Delaware. And because we are a small state geographically, if a family's looking at a $600 tax burden, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them decide, well, heck, I happen to be here in Trenton, I'm just going to go across the river. Gee, that's worth saving $600, don't you think? So I'm afraid that this bill, aside from being a burden on young families, could wind up costing New Jersey procedures as people seek other places in neighboring states to get the procedures done, not subject to taxation. That's going to cost our providers, it's going to cost our state revenues, and I think it's bad policy and procedure for New Jersey. Mr. Speaker, this is a road that New Jersey should not go down. Once we start here, it is only a matter of time before someone in our midst will be back with another tax. And next time, maybe it's all medical procedures. Or next time, maybe it's going to your lawyer that gets taxed on a sales tax basis. Or maybe it's going to your accountant. Or who knows what other services. Mr. Speaker, if this state has any intention of remaining competitive as a place to live and do business and to raise a family, we cannot continue to adopt policies that are unique to New Jersey and place New Jersey at a major competitive disadvantage with our neighboring states. This is terrible policy, Mr. Speaker. We're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. This is a bad bill, and we should reject it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Panaccio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back on the bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill goes beyond what we're talking about today. This bill sets up a mechanism, Mr. Speaker, how to tax medicine and how to tax medicine now and in the future. And I have a suspicion that this bill is as much about what happened during last year's election as it is funding charity care. This is the proverbial nose in the camel's tent, Mr. Speaker. What we'll do is we'll set up the mechanism, and innocuously we'll just start taxing a few procedures here and there that are cosmetic, that are optional, and in time you'll see how that list grows and grows and grows. What is normal? It'll be up to the provider to determine what is normal and what is medically needed. Let me tell you, there's a lot of instances, Mr. Speaker, when you'll have a young lady that doesn't feel good about herself because of her appearance, what's actually affecting her psyche, will actually maybe causing depression, where whatever that medical procedure that she chooses to have done should be done because it is medically necessary to help her and to help restore her frame of mind. We can't make that determination, Mr. Speaker, both as legislators and quite frankly as healthcare providers, what is normal and what is not normal, and we shouldn't get in the middle of that, Mr. Speaker. This bill goes beyond what intentions are. Being a healthcare provider and a dentist for the last 25 years, I'll tell you, for instance, some of the cutest kids I've ever seen in my office, Mr. Speaker, are kids that come in and through no fault of their own, they've taken medication, antibiotics, for whatever reasons. In particular, tetracycline, Mr. Speaker. These kids could have perfectly straight teeth. Perfectly normal straight teeth, no cavities in their mouth. But their teeth are disgustingly brown or greenish brown. Under this bill, through no fault of their own, these kids are going to be taxed in order to give them some type of cosmetic procedure, because this bill, as it reads, means that it is cosmetic and it's not normally needed. They have perfect function, they have straight teeth, they have no cavities, but their teeth are discolored through no fault of their own. We're setting up a mechanism here, Mr. Speaker, to hurt these kids, setting up a mechanism to start taxing medicine more and more in the future. Not over my support, you do. Do you get it? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Keene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question for the sponsor, please, Mr. Speaker.
Will the sponsor yield?
Of course, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman Cryan. And first a brief observation. I live about an hour south of Manhattan and about an hour east of Philadelphia. So whenever there's a medical situation, a proposed operation in my area, people always take the convenience into consideration about where they're going to go. Are they going to go to Manhattan or Philadelphia, where traditionally some of the procedures have been performed with better expertise? That's changed over the years, and now people are more prone to stay local and to take advantage of some of the local surgeons or whatever the particular operation is. So I did want to echo some of my colleagues and point out that I think this will make it harder for people to stay local and give more of an incentive to leave the state to have the procedure. And then just a quick follow-up question. I have to ask this because it was something that came into my district office, and I didn't know how to answer it. And it also kind of underscores some of the ambiguity about some of the operations that are raised. Is it cosmetic? Is it medical? And this question was, is a sex change something that's covered under this? Is this a taxed operation? So if you could answer that so that I could get back to my constituent, I would appreciate it.
I hope so.
Why don't we, through you, Mr. Speaker, why don't we go with the first part first? That's great. The first part first, Assemblyman Keene, would be, let's understand that this is optional surgery. And whether it's an hour to Philadelphia or an hour to New York, there's also a comfort level with particular physicians. There's also where physicians' residences are. There's also practices that are set up. We're talking about 6% gross receipts on optional cosmetic surgery. The idea that there'll be this immediate flight certainly doesn't partake when one figures that, are you going to, for example, for some of these things, the cost isn't particularly heavy, and as a result, would you really travel 2.5 hours in some cases to do that? That would be certainly left up to the consumer, but I think it's reasonable to expect that the extreme examples that have been cited time and time again here are probably just that, the extreme. What about the sex? I tell you what, I'm stumped on the sex change thing, Sean. My sense is that, depends on, I'm not even going to go with a joke. I don't know.
That's optional.
You know what, that might be optional, Sean. It depends, I suppose. Excuse me, I should say something, McKeon. I apologize for the informality.
No problem.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, some would consider that medically, and again, we would fall to a doctor's purview as to whether or not it's a medical condition. I don't know the answer to that sitting here. I represented to this body earlier that I'm not a physician. However, I would also remind you that, for example, the most common cosmetic procedure today is Botox. And the cost of Botox is not something I think that most folks would look at driving across and sitting in tunnel traffic to do outside of the state's borders. It's more of a convenience factor.
Thank you. Through the Speaker. Follow-up question?
Yes.
Then Assemblyman
yield?
Sure. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Then Assemblyman, you wouldn't be able to answer the follow-up question, which is which gender would be impacted more by a proposed tax on a sex change operation?
Well, no, Sean, I wouldn't. No.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Seeing no one further, Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. Don't get excited. Madam Clerk, please close the machine, take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3125 has received 41 votes in the affirmative, 36 votes in the negative, and 2 abstentions.
Assembly Bill 3125, having received 41 votes in the affirmative, 36 votes in the negative, and 2 abstentions, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course of past bills. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3113, sponsored by Assemblywoman Weinberg, increases the cigarette tax by 35 cents per pack.
Assemblywoman Weinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, for a complete change of pace, and for something where we are competitive with New York, I move the bill.
Assemblywoman Weinberg moves the bill. Assemblyman Barone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I join my colleague, Mrs. Weinberg, and this is a much more serious bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would the sponsor yield for a few very brief questions?
The sponsor yield?
Yes, of course.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Assemblywoman, it is my understanding that this bill, the 35 cents of additional tobacco tax, all 35 cents goes to what was previously approved in the securitization. Is that right?
I believe that's what the sponsor of the securitization bill said, yes. But that is not addressed in this bill.
Right. But this bill, through you, Mr. Speaker, again, I'm sorry, Assemblywoman, this will raise, according to the bill, approximately $100 million in additional tax revenue. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is therefore my understanding that not $1 of that $100 million will be used for any...
Mr. Speaker, I'm having a little difficulty hearing, if you...
Members, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my understanding, I'll repeat the question. Through you, Mr. Speaker. It's my understanding, based on the bill and our previous work here in this chamber, that of the $100 million that this tobacco tax will raise, not $1 will go to anything except securitization.
Yes, of the additional tax, but the...
Right, of this 35-cent tax increase. Which would tell me that not $1, through you, Mr. Speaker, that not $1 will go
Mr. Speaker, if I may just clarify, that does not take place for 2 years, I believe. So the next 2 years of this additional tax is not used for that.
So in that period of time, not $1 will go to any program whatsoever to promote smoking cessation. Is that correct?
No, that is not covered in this bill, but in fact, in the budget, the smoking cessation program has been increased somewhat. But that is not in this bill.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I know we're not on the budget. It's my understanding that we're increasing tobacco cessation by $1 million in the budget, which tells me, Mr. Speaker, on the bill, if I might.
On the bill.
It tells me that this bill is going to yield $100 million, this tax on tobacco, $100 million, and not one dime will go to tell anyone to stop smoking. Does that not bother anyone? See, there's two reasons to tax anything. Only two. You can tax to raise revenue, or you can tax to provide incentives and disincentives for people to behave a certain way. There are only two reasons to tax anyone. So which one is this? Is this a generation of revenue? And it is. This will generate an additional $100 million in revenue. But in doing so, we continue to addict our state government on tobacco. We are going to continue to addict our state budget, and now, because of what it's being used for, we're going to addict us for 20, 30 years. So are we providing an incentive or a disincentive from certain kinds of behavior? We are not. We don't take a single dime out of $100 million to teach a child not to smoke, to convince an adult to stop smoking. I'm not going to get on this floor tonight and talk about people may cross state lines, or this is, this is bad public health policy. We are addicting state government to a revenue source that in the end kills the people of New Jersey. Tobacco kills. So by increasing this tax tonight, without spending any money from the tax to stop smoking, we're doing the worst of all worlds. We are addicting our state to tobacco and doing nothing to stop any child or any adult from becoming addicted themselves to tobacco. We should defeat this tax.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, we're here for the third annual cigarette taxathon. This bill provides even more incentive for bootleggers and smugglers to get taxes, to avoid taxes in New Jersey, and to make sure that cigarettes come into this state illegally. This bill provides even more incentive for New Jersey residents to go to Delaware, to go to Pennsylvania, to go to almost anywhere, the internet, to reservations, to get cigarettes without taxes. Mr. Speaker, this bill increases the profit margin for people who smuggle cigarettes into this state. And the proof of what's going on, Mr. Speaker, is there has been a significant decline in the sales volume of cigarettes in the state of New Jersey. Figures available to me indicate that we have lost approximately 30% of our sales volume in the past 2 years. This was predicted, Mr. Speaker. This was predicted, and it was ignored. New Jersey went and imposed other sales taxes on cigarettes. We increased it not once but twice, and now we're coming back to the well one more time. The trouble is, Mr. Speaker, this loss of cigarette volume is going to get worse for the state of New Jersey if this bill passes. This bill hurts New Jersey retailers. I can give you an example of someone who testified, a store that was losing $400,000 a week in sales of cigarettes because of the tax that's been imposed. As I have noted in connection with other bills, New Jersey is a small state, Mr. Speaker. It is not that hard to leave and to go to other places that don't have the same ill-advised tax policies as we do. So we're going to lose retailers as a result of this. We're going to lose jobs because these retailers provide jobs. And of course, we're also going to long-term end up losing revenues. And as we all know, none of the money is dedicated to smoking cessation. In short, Mr. Speaker, what we have then is an unfair, regressive tax. It's unfair because New Jersey makes more money off of these cigarettes, these deadly devices, than big tobacco. And I remember everybody who's vilified big tobacco, but here we are, the state of New Jersey, and we're an unindicted co-conspirator with them. Mr. Speaker, New Jersey should break its growing addiction to tobacco money. This bill should be rejected. We've done enough damage already. Let's not do any more. I urge my colleagues to reject this tax. We don't need it. It's bad for New Jersey. It's bad for our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Malone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just have a couple questions to the sponsor.
Will the
I
sponsor
could
yield?
have guessed. I certainly will.
Well, I just, Madam Sponsor, this House has come to recognize you as the champion for smoking cessation and for helping children. Do you feel that the request to have you sponsor this piece of legislation marginalizes the efforts that you have made over the years in this area because of the gross misuse of the funds not going to smoking cessation and helping of children?
Assemblyman Malone, they didn't ask me to sponsor this bill. I asked to sponsor the bill. And I would have been happy had the Appropriations Committee not rolled it back from 45 cents to 35 cents package. So I hope that answers your question.
It doesn't, but I'll ask it another way.
Okay.
Does anything in this legislation work towards the efforts that you have undertaken over the years in stopping smoking and offering cessation programs?
Yes, when taxes are increased on cigarettes, less kids can afford to buy them and less kids start to smoke. That is a proven fact, so I believe that this bill will add to my reputation of working very hard to keep our children away from cigarettes. And in terms of the economics of it, the average, by the way, the cost of treating the illness from cigarettes runs around $7 a package. So any person that doesn't buy, any child that is not hooked in to smoking cigarettes because they're not going to be able to afford to buy them, we are saving throughout their lives, beside the quality of their lives, we're saving $7 a package from treating them from future illness.
Are there any statistics that show that the last cigarette tax increase has decreased smoking in high schools?
I don't have those statistics. I only have the gross numbers of what was predicted and what actually came in, but I do not have the numbers. But I know that practically every study shows that when you increase taxes on cigarettes, and that's why groups like the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids urge continued increase in taxes. That's why articles, for instance, one of the columnists in the Record, whom I happen to respect a great deal, by the name of Jeff Page, just in the last few days wrote a column about the increased cigarette tax and all about how the increased tax helps keep kids away from tobacco. So I'm proud to sponsor this, and as I said, nobody asked me to do it. I asked to be the sponsor.
Do you consider smoking to be an addiction?
Yes.
Are we preying on people who have an addiction by raising these taxes?
No, I think we're helping people who have that addiction to put money back into their pocket and help get them off it.
Do people who smoke tend to be poor and less educated?
Well, I think that there is some belief that lower income people smoke more, and part of that is the way tobacco aims its advertising into lower income areas. And I think that that the harm that comes from smoking with lower income communities are already suffering disproportionately from smoking related diseases, disability, death, and various other costs. And I would hope that this is going to help bring some of those lower income people away from purchasing cigarettes and breaking the addiction or not getting started to begin with.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, during the budget hearings, some very shocking pieces of literature or advertising were brought forth by Assemblyman Payne about the deliberate attempt to hook minority children on smoking. It was a hip-hop kind of packaging. It was very slick and, to me, very despicable. I would have thought that instead of the meager $11 million that is being spent out of all of the hundreds of millions of dollars that we are collecting in tobacco tax, that we would be able to find more than $11 million to fight this kind of insidious kind of conduct. This bill does nothing towards that end. I don't know if you have a response to that or...
Well, I think I responded to that with my earlier comments. I believe that a raise in the tax and a raise in the price of a package of cigarettes will do a great deal for keeping kids and kids from lower income areas from starting to smoke because they won't have the money to buy a package of cigarettes and they won't get hooked into it to begin with. Now, I happen to agree with what you said, Assemblyman Payne said, and I think I covered that in my remarks, that the tobacco companies should stop aiming their advertising that way. I think the other comments you made are not addressed in this bill. They are addressed in the budget bill, and we'll have plenty of time to debate that when we get to that bill.
Which aspects did I ask about? that are
About the
addressed?
smoking cessation programs.
Well, nothing in this bill. The question was really, there's nothing in this bill that addresses, there's $100 million that we're going to obtain from this bill. Nothing in this bill is directed towards smoking
No, this
cessation.
is not an appropriations bill.